Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here. And as was said, it is the first time for me in Israel. And I'm not going to talk so much about the sun, but I will say it's the second time in 15 years that I managed to get my wife to join me somewhere. So that is the best thing. Yeah. It's really fantastic. I'm so excited about having a few days to be here because of, obviously from historical perspective, this is one of the most interesting and exciting regions that you can go to. I'm really pleased to have that opportunity. What I should say is that I also realized that I have a huge challenge. I mean, before me was Enzo. Enzo is a brilliant speaker. He's Italian. He speaks with passion. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I am from Sweden. And you know, everyone who comes from cold countries, they are a little bit, you know, more restrained in their gestures and their passion. But we do our best. So let's try to work through this in the best way. Yeah? The other thing is obviously that Enzo and I, I've known each other for many years. We are having the equal type of positions in the banks. So I'm the procurement director in EBRD. He's in the World Bank. You know the World Bank very well. Maybe not so much about EBRD. One thing to start with is that if you think about EBRD, then in terms of procurement, it works very similar. In terms of the bank, you take away a few of the zeros at the end. We are much smaller, yeah? That is very clear, yeah? So, yes, to start with, my name is Jackholt. And I would invite you as friends, I hope we will be friends after this, to call me Jack. There's only my mother who calls me Jan, and if you say Jan, I will jump because I think I've done something wrong. So please call me Jack, that's me. Yeah? So just a little bit, I'm going to try, given that, let's say, probably 80% of what Enzo was saying also applies very similar to our bank. So I'm going to try just to focus on those things which are not so similar. Yeah? And that starts obviously with the bank in itself to start with. We are not, just to make sure that that is clear, we are not the European Investment Bank. You know, the European Investment Bank is the financial arm of the EU. And we are an international financing institution. We stand on our own legs. It's a difficult, let's say, a different type of organization, but it is very important to differentiate, you know. Because even though we are called European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, when you start to look at the bank, now, sorry, I have a lot of, okay, now I have the full one, yeah. So it's called the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and then you think, so what is the European element? Well, true. So far, since we have the headquarters in London, at least for another 2 years, we can probably say that we are European, where the bank is in Europe, etc. Then I have no idea how that is going to be perceived. Second thing is that we operate in a number of European countries, yes, but not only European countries. So, third thing is that the shareholding of the bank is not only European. But if you look at this, the majority of the bank is owned by European interests. So basically the EU, now it says 28 countries right now, owns about 63% of the bank. Japan has a share, US has a share, others, which means that other countries which are outside the EU are also having a share in the bank, as well as you. You all are owners of the bank. Yeah? So my point here is that it is not a bank which is set up to promote specific, let's say, European interest or the European Union. It is an international financing institution. Yeah? And so we are owned by 66 countries and 2 intergovernmental institutions, which is, in fact, the EU and the European Investment Bank. So our friends in the EIB, they like to tease me when they say, oh, no, don't say against me because we own you. Yeah? We have a capital base which is 30 billion, which is obviously, when you compare with the World Bank, it's a I wouldn't say a drop in the ocean. It's still a lot of money that we have as a capital base, which we can do a lot of very interesting things with. You know? So even though we are small in comparison with the World Bank, I think that we have a very interesting concept and interesting portfolio, which I would like to talk a little bit more about later. Now, the World Bank has, for years, have poverty alleviation as the main objective, to eradicate poverty in the world. Now, if you look at the basic principles of EBRD, it doesn't say anything about that. If you go to the other multilateral development bank, if you go to Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development, the African Development Bank, World Bank, etc., they all talk about poverty alleviation, but we don't. What we talk about is transition impact, and that means that in those countries where we are financing projects, the whole idea with the concept with that project is that it has to have an additional value to the transition of that country from the old, let's say, communist style of running the country to a market-driven open economy. That is the transition impacts. So each and every project that goes to the board in the bank needs to prove that this is not just a standalone project. It does come with something more which helps the country to develop its economy. That is very important. So we like very much sort of the sector type approach because that has a big impact on the country. Also, additionality. That means that the bank was set up to help with transition. That means that obviously we should not outcompete the private market. That is very important. So if another investment bank, private investment bank, want to do the project, we are not allowed to compete with them, because that would be really just shooting ourselves in the foot, you know, would not be in part of what we are trying to do. And the third one, sound banking. So the sound banking principle is very important. Everything that we do needs to generate money for the bank. So what does that mean for the culture of the bank? Well, it means very much that whilst we are called development bank, it is a very commercial culture in the bank. We need to have projects which also generates some yield for the bank. You know. So sound banking is a very important principle. Now, where do we work? Well, we do not work all over the world, but we work in a quite substantial part of this, on this map here. Yeah? So the bank was set up in 1991, and that was in the context of the fall of the Soviet Union, when all the new, let's say, all the old countries which became again countries started to gain their independence. You know? And that was really the whole idea with the bank from the beginning, to work in the old Soviet Union and help those countries now to go on the path of economic prosperity and political freedom. Yeah? So and then about, what is it now, 5 years ago, we also started to look at the region around us here. Yeah? So we incorporated what we called the Semite countries. They are in the World Bank lingo, it's more called the MENA, but for us it's called the Semite countries. And that includes Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Jordan. These were the first countries which from this part of the world which became members of the bank. And not only members of the bank, but they also became countries of operation, meaning that everyone who owns the bank cannot also come to us and get money. They have to be the bank's countries of operation. Yeah? So these were the first countries which, from this neck of the wood, which became part of the bank. And then very lately we have added that we, actually last year, that we can now start to work in Lebanon. The latest countries also was Greece and Cyprus, and Greece obviously because of the economical situation there. No one expected them to be a country of operation 10 years ago, but that's development in the world. But the majority of what we have done over the years has really been on the upper right-hand part of it. And altogether, since we started in 1991, we have done more than 5,000 projects, and we have invested more than 115 billion euro. Approximately 70%, and I would say it's probably slightly less, probably 60%, 65% of that is in the private sector. And that is very important to remember. Our bank, as part of, you remember this slide from the World Bank where they say we have EBRD, we have IDA, which is public sector, then you have the private sector arm, IFC. In our bank, it's a sort of a conglomerate of that. We have both the private sector and the public sector, and private sector is really the focus of the bank. That's really where most of the attention is going. And I think this is very important for you to remember, and I had a very quick discussion here with a gentleman from the medical profession, where I said that I think that in your context, what you really should look at is the private sector arm of the bank, you know, being part of an investment from a private sector perspective in our countries of operation. And I think that is a message to remember. My part is procurement, very much in the public domain, but as a bank, it's very much private sector. You know? Right. Here is a slide which I must say that when I saw Enzo's, then I thought, well, you know, at least I could probably say I have nicer photos. Because at the end of the day, it's very similar. You know, transport is the infrastructure is a very important part of what we do. This is obviously predominantly in the public sector, municipal environmental infrastructure. That is where you see most of the contracts that we are placing in the public sector. Not the ones with the highest values, but most in terms of number. Yeah? Property and tourism, it's predominantly private. Natural resources, predominantly public. Financial institutions, predominantly private. Telecoms, information and media, private. Manufacturing and service, private. Power and energy, public. Industry, commerce and agribusiness, private. So a lot of private in this portfolio. Just to give you a few examples of what that could be, and I've just picked a few here just to show, let's say, variety. You know? So this is a project in Jordan. It's a solar project, a private sector where we invested $35 million US, and I would say that if you look at average sizes of our projects, I would say that probably between 50 and 100 million, that is sort of the average where they are. Sometimes they stick up to 200, 300 million, but that's not very often. They are normally between 50 and 100 million. You know? That is, I would say, a more typical type of project. So, solar project. Another example, and this is now in the public sector, typical with the infrastructure. This is in Uzbekistan. This is about motorways. We do a lot of motorways. We do a lot of rail. We do a lot of transportation in general. Everything from a signaling system, the rail network in itself, the buses, the wagons, rolling stock, etc. A lot of this kind of stuff in the public sector. But as I said also before, in terms of number of contracts, most of them are really water and wastewater. There we see a lot of that. You know. Here's another one, just to show you sort of variety of projects. This is a concession project, and in our context, we are only financing the private sector party of a concession arrangement. Yeah? So even though there is nothing in our policies which said that we cannot do it in the public sector, we have traditionally only done projects financing the private party of a concession arrangement. Another one, and the last one, which I'm going to take as an example of projects, is this one. This is a smaller project, 5 million, which means that because of its size, it goes in a certain different kind of decision-making process in the bank, which is much quicker than the other one. And as Enzo was alluding to, projects do not happen overnight, especially when they are in the public sector. It takes a lot of time. But if it is a smaller project, we have another stream in the bank, which works more efficient and where we can set up projects much quicker. So this is a hypermarket in Tajikistan, another very typical example of the type of projects that we do. But in fact, I could say we have done everything. I've been with the bank for 19 years. That's why I have so much gray hair. I have seen projects from rocket launches in Tajikistan to jeans factories to actually cognac factories to agriculture, anything really, anything under the sun, with the exception of that we are not much in the educational system. We don't do schooling, for instance. And why? Well, obviously that's very hard to get sound banking out of that unless it's a private sector. But if it's private sector, then it comes with a political connotation. And the same applies when it comes to hospitals and welfare. We are not very much in that, with the exception of that there are a few, let's say, private hospitals where we have built the actual hospital, the construction of the building, but nothing else. You know? So very much infrastructure, private industry, everything which is, provides a sound banking base. That's where we can get involved. And basically, let's say from your perspective, how could you then be part of getting support and financing from the bank? Well, you can only do that if you actually, let's say in a private sector project, if you are actually establishing yourself in one way or the other in our countries of operation. That's the only way that you can gain from the bank's support and financing. And I should also emphasize in that context, when I say it's not only financing, it is also support, because we do provide a lot of hand-holding, and we do, at the end of the day, take part of that risk with that project. Another very interesting part of the bank, what the bank is doing, and again, I said I will focus on things that maybe are slightly dissimilar from Enzo and the World Bank. And this is something which is very different from any one of the other banks, being in the nuclear sector. Yeah? And we have, since the setup of, I should maybe show you the rest here also, that we are managing 6 nuclear funds. It's not the bank's own financing which is going to nuclear safety, but it is actually a conglomerate of countries which have said there is so much risk and so much, let's say, money that is so much risk that we have seen with the nuclear facilities in our close, let's say, surrounding, that we need to put in money to help these countries to increase the safety. And the obvious one is the one that you see here. It's actually now finished, and I have been a couple of times just standing outside this reactor. Is quite an impressive place to be, a bit scary, but it's a marvelous place. And this building, which is actually so big that you can actually roll it in over the Wembley Stadium outside London. It is enormous, and the whole idea with this this whole building is that they build it on the side of the reactor, and then they rolled it in over the reactor and closed it properly. And then inside this building you have all the traverses which are being controlled from outside, which are then over time going to work on dismantling the the reactor which blew up. It's an amazing feat of engineering, I would say. This is just one part of the nuclear safety activities. There are many other parts because we do work in other countries also, but there it is to help those countries with the safety measurements in these countries. We also work with another very interesting project, and that is the dismantling of the submarines. The Russian atomic submarines, which have gone out of service, we have been supporting them with dismantling these ones in a safe way. All of this, whether you are in the public sector, the private sector, or you are in a concession arrangement, has a procurement angle. And our procurement policies and rules, which is basically the blue version here, for those of you who knows UK well, this is how the new UK passport will look like, the blue one. And then we have the EBRD financing of private parties to concession. This is our approach from a procurement perspective when we are going into a concessional arrangement. And we did change this policy. I'll start with that one just 2 years ago, because when we wrote it the first time, which was just when I joined the bank, then our understanding was that we were going to be involved in all these big fancy concession arrangements with the airports, etc., and not small concessions. And that we were going to be in this from the beginning when we actually had the possibility to have an impact on how you selected the concessionaire. It proved over time it was the total opposite. The 99.9% of all the concession arrangements that we are involved in are small concessions in our countries of operations, which we are picking up sometimes 10, 15 years after the concession arrangement was set in place. And that didn't work very well with our policy. So we had to change the policy to have a little bit more pragmatic view on how to look at this. When it comes to the procurement policies and rules, which governs this blue book, which is 20 pages, which governs public sector, private sector, and consultancy service, all in one, 20 pages. So also very principle-based, as Enzo was alluding to before, which I think is, for us procurement nerds, as we are, it is very important. Because at the end of the day, we must have procurement systems which allows judgment, which allows the best approaches. And you can only do that in our IFI world if you have policies which are based on sound principles, but methods and how you achieve those principles are left to professionals. That's really how it needs to be done, in my opinion. And I'm not going to go very much into, let's say, how the procurement policies work, because I think that Enzo, like I said before you came in, 80% of your slides is very much exactly the same as we do. It's very similar, very, very similar. The interesting part is maybe that we have private sector as part of the procurement policy. And what do we say in the private sector? Well, we are not saying you must have an open tender or you must conduct it like X, Y, and Z. But what we do say, the bottom line of all the things that we are saying is that we are not going to finance anything which we believe, in accordance with our analysis, are above market values. So if we have setups where we believe that there is a question about the market value, we will investigate that before we make provide financing. Yeah? Now, just a few things maybe that could be also interesting in the policy is that which we didn't mention, I don't think you mentioned, but financial intermediate, for instance, if you are in the private sector sphere, if we are providing financing through private sector financial intermediate, which could be a private bank, and we do a lot of that, a lot of our financing is going through banks, then a private sector off-taker of that still needs to adhere to our policy. a public sector off-taker of that, like a municipality, for instance, needs to adhere to the key principles of our policy, but certainly doesn't need to do our open tender or etc. And we have no oversight of what they are doing. So there's but we have the same approach now in our policies. But these are sort of the things which doesn't go in sort of the mainstream always when you talk about procurement. Otherwise, very similar. So, and just to illustrate that, we share the basic same principles as all the MDBs, even though they are slightly dissimilar. I mentioned the EIB before. EIB is very different from how the World Bank and the other IFIs are working, because they are financial instrument of the EU, and they base everything on national law. But they do go in and they say that if there is something in your national law which goes against the key principles of the EU, you have to take it out of your procurement methods. Now here comes another difference in sort of how we can operate, because when we look at our slides, you talk about borrowers, we talk about clients. Now clients for us and borrowers for the World Bank is the country. We also provide financing to the two countries in 50% of the public sector engagement that we're doing. But the other 50 we do provide to what we call sub-sovereign operations, meaning directly to municipalities or state-owned organizations. They are still public sector. But the point here is that from a procurement nerd point of view, again, when you are dealing directly with the country and you provide a sovereign loan, that means that the loan takes precedence over your national law. And that means that you can go in and say, we don't like that in your national law, therefore you change it. And they will have to agree because it's been signed off by the Duma or the Parliament or whichever sort of government institution signs off. If you do that, let's say, if you have a sub-sovereign operation, you cannot. It just doesn't work, because the municipality cannot override the national law. And then it becomes a totally different, let's say, context that you have to work in with your rules. Our procurement rules, they are by virtue of the agreement establishing the bank, they have to adhere to the World Trade Organization's government procurement agreement. So everything has to be streamlined with that. Is that difficult? Not really. The GPA sets out very, very good principles, but also very high principles, really, for how procurement should be done. So, but we still need to make sure that those principles are the same in our bank as the GPA. And as Enzo was saying, decisions at the end of the day, ultimately it's our clients that do the procurement, but we have a very stringent oversight. And here comes one of the good things of having less zeros in the numbers. So because in our bank, which only do project financing, in public sector it is much easier for us to keep control over each and every contract because we have much lesser contract. And we do have a procurement organization which is able to have a full oversight on each and every contract. And that means that we can support the clients, follow every contract and have full monitoring of every contract plus implementation, which is for us very important. Value for money has for us been always a very, very key topic for the way that we look at how the procurement arrangements are set up. Very important principle is that no eligibility restrictions. So no country, just by the name of the country, can be their firms can be restricted from participation. Everyone can participate. There are only two rules for that, and that is that unless the company is caught by the UN Chapter 7 or by a debarment from our bank, even though we have cross-debarment through a number of the IFIs, they have to be debarred by our bank, and it works the same way in the World Bank, has to be the bar buyer. So those are the only two sort of eligibility restrictions. Everything else is really about the capability to perform the contract. And there were some questions about that. And that is, for us, is one of the key things that we are looking at when we do the oversight. Are these individuals, or are these companies, or these joint ventures, are they capable of doing perform under the contract? That's extremely important for us, you know. And I've never, let's say, as a procurement person, I have never liked this saying that you only look at price, you know. To start with, we have methodologies which are, let's say, looking well beyond price, but there are definitely cases when price as the ultimate factor is a very good way of doing procurement. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. But to start with, they have, the company has to be capable of performing, so they have to prove that. Second of all, if we are talking about goods, the goods needs to adhere to what has been asked for. And only then, once you looked at that, you start to look at the price. That's very important. In our, let's say, the type of procurement we are doing, we are advocating a lot two-stage tendering, which means that you give the client and potential contractors an opportunity before money is on the table to actually meet up and iron out technical issues, methodology issues, so that you know that once they finally tender, they can come in with the best offer based on a proper proposal. So we have the EBRD procurement function. That is the function that I'm heading up as director. The basic, let's say, most important thing for us to do is to support our clients. And the procurement function is divided into two parts. One is the procurement policy and advisory department, which is the one with most gray hair, like myself, or in some cases no hair at all, meaning that they have been around for quite some time. All of us have been working in projects in our countries of operation for a number of years. All of us have joined, let's say, either our bank or another bank and worked on the banking side as a procurement specialist before you can be considered to work in the advisory department. So that's the idea with the advisory department. So the advisory department supports predominantly the clients through the support of the procurement specialists in the banking teams. So we have procurement specialists which are working in nuclear safety, municipal and environmental infrastructure, in transport, and in the power and energy sector. But we do a lot of other, I think, very interesting things also. We work with policy dialogue with our countries of operation, exactly like Enzo was talking about before, even though we might do it slightly different, but the way we do it, or let's say the aim of what we do, is exactly the same. We have a memorandum of understanding with some of the key countries where we believe that we have so much public sector interest in these countries and so much problems with the national context of procurement that we need to work with the governments to make sure that we can try to iron out those ones. We also work very close with our legal transition department in the bank, which, as the name would say, work with anything that support the countries to have a better legal framework. And obviously our interest in that is to make sure that they have a good legal framework for procurement. And we have set up two joint ventures, which are external, together with the legal transition team. The first one is with the UNCITRAL, and it's the UN's legal arm. And they have what's called the model law procurement, which is broadly supported by many countries. They've come up to the model law, which is like a toolbox for good procurement. And with UNCITRAL, we can offer those countries which are interested to bring up the level of their procurement framework up to UNCITRAL standard. And if they do so, we can offer them the next joint venture, which is the other one we have, which is with the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement Secretariat. So we can then also help those countries to become GPA members. And we have so far managed to get 5 countries in to GPA members with this initiative. Capacity building is also something which is extraordinarily important, but I remember from the World Bank report when the discussion started about revising your policy, there was an advisory group which were looking at the different aspects, and basically at the end of the page as a summary it said what you need is capacity building, and capacity building. That is at the end of the day so important. Now, as a small little bank, we can obviously not be everywhere and doing capacity building. It's impossible. So we need to have a good strategy for that. And we decided a couple of years ago, 6 years ago, to start another joint venture. I'm very much to joint venture. I like that a lot because no one of us, not even the World Bank, has the resources to do everything themselves. We need to work together. It's very important. So we set up a masterclass together with the University of Tor Vergata in Rome. And the whole idea with that is that we are offering those who are already procurement professionals in our countries of operations, those who are working in the public procurement authorities, in competition authorities, complaint authorities, etc., that we will finance their master in public procurement management. So we take them from their countries, we bring them to Tor Vergata University. They spend 4.5 months on campus, 1 year of getting a dose of best practice in procurement, and then they go home, and hopefully they are injecting right into the public procurement stream the newfound knowledge on a high level. So that's the concept behind the whole thing. And spin-off effects of that is that we also get a very good network in our countries of operations with people to start with that we know, because I go there myself 3 times a year and do lecturing. Some of my other guys do the same. World Bank is coming and helping out, and other banks also. We get to know them. That means that when we want to do policy dialogue, it is all of a sudden much easier because we actually know them. They are our friends. They work now in our countries. Then they are also using this network because the alumni part is very important of this, so it means that they are communicating with each other. And I know that they do because I follow this on Facebook and a special site that we have set up, so I know exactly what they are talking about, and they really use it. Another very good spin-off effect is that if any one of you have been on one of these dating sites, forget that. Come to Tor Vergata because we have produced 4 marriages so far. Yeah. So that's another good spin-off effect. Yeah. Now, if you want to work with the bank and are interested in a... Exactly. Yeah, that's why we need donor funds. Exactly. Well, same way as with any other institution, any other private enterprise, any other public institution in IFI, you go to the website. That's where you find all information nowadays. There's nothing special with that. This is where you find it on our website. It's called Work With Us. At the end of the day, if you're in the public, let's say interested in public sector contracting, you're not going to work with us. You're going to work with the clients. But anyway, that's where you look. Work with us. So you go into procurement, and this is the best hint I'm going to give you today. Like I said before, we have a very good oversight of every contract that we are financing. And the fact is, it's not sort of a snapshot in time. I can actually see the future. We are collecting all the data from all the procurement plans that are being approved by our board, and we are generous enough to share that with you. So if you go into what's called contract pipeline here, if you want to be well prepared, this is where to look. On this list here, and it's divided in sort of a relative ranking in terms of how big these contracts are, you will find a list which, last time I looked at it, we had about 9 billion worth of contracts on this list. And I think this is the ultimate tool for you to be prepared well ahead if you are interested in any of our contracts. Here you can see the contracts that we have for the next 3 years, basically. And you can prepare yourself. There's nothing wrong with once you have identified a contract and a project which you are interested in. There's absolutely nothing wrong with contacting the client. In fact, I would advocate that you contact the client, prepare yourself, study the project, and see if you can participate. However, once the actual contract is out for tendering, then you shouldn't do that. Then you need to be careful. Yeah? But this, I think, is well worth looking at. Another thing, someone was alluding to this about a well-known practice that once a tender has gone in, then if you are in cahoots with the client somehow or the evaluation committee somehow, there is always a possibility to do some dealing here and there, which you don't really want to see. You know? And whilst we have a good oversight, we can't see everything. We are trying to refrain from actually looking at tenders because, in our opinion, once we start to look at tenders, then it means that we become part and parcel of the evaluation, and we cannot do that. We can request pages, etc., which we look at if we know what to look for. But one way of trying to get away from this kind of meddling in procurement is to use e-procurement, which helps. I'm not saying in any way that e-procurement is the genesis for corruption. In my opinion, absolutely not. Anyone who is clever enough will find a way anyway to do it. But it does certainly help with a lot of, let's say, process issues. And I think it makes corruption more difficult in this context. So what we have done is that we have developed an e-procurement portal, which we call ESEP. And this is going to be more and more the natural tool for any procurement in the bank. So any procurement which is going to be done by our clients has to go through this website, and we can then monitor much more effectively through this website. This one is already up and running, and we are with new projects. We are filling up the sort of the stream of projects. So, in our context, when you're looking for tender opportunities, you go in to work with us, and you either look on the list of tenders which are announced on our website. Every tender is there, or you can also go to ESEP directly and look at them there. Now, this is a typical setup of a public sector project, and this works exactly in the same in the World Bank and the other multilateral development banks. You have EBRD or World Bank or anyone financing the project. You have a consultancy service for project preparation, and then you have consultant service for project implementation, and then either a goods supplier or work supplier or works contractor, which is doing the implementation, and a public sector client at the end of the day. It's bog standard, really, at the end of the day. Very much similar. Now, a little bit about the statistics. I told you before, take away a few zeros from the World Bank sort of numbers, and you end up approximately where we are. So last year, our clients signed 214 contracts for about 2.6 billion. So that's how big we are. So if you take 2.6 and divide by 214, then you get approximately average value of the contracts. So you see approximately where we are. Where do the money go to? Well, this you don't need to worry about the figures, but the point is that most of our contracts that we are financing are really works contract. And at the end of the day, exactly like Enzo was saying, if you should be a works, let's say, a contractor and want to work in our countries of operation, I would say, you know, in one way or another, to join forces with the local company is almost inevitable. You have to. So that is also why we see in our statistics, because our statistics only look at either a single tender or the winning contractor or the lead partner of a joint venture. And predominantly we see that there are local companies nowadays that are winning these contracts. But statistics doesn't tell you everything, because below statistics, you need to drill down to see what is the actual participation. And when you start to look at the joint venture partners, and when you start to even look at the winning partners, you realize there is a lot of international ownership and interest in those companies. When you start to look at what they are actually supplying, you will find, and you know how it works, contract, okay, the majority is works, but you have a lot of material under that, and you start to see that there is a lot of material coming from all over the world. So there is certainly more international participation than what you see from the visual statistics. But most of it, as I say, works contracts. So then, if we look at consultancy, which should be for you, in my opinion, very interesting, a well-developed country, a well-developed industry, very, very innovative, very much in the front. Consultancy, there should be a lot of opportunities. So over 30% of EBRD investments and policy reforms are requiring consultancy support. There's a lot of things to do here. And in 2016, let's say, either us or the clients signed about 3,000 contracts with consultancy industry. And the approved number of technical cooperation consultancy was 585 to a value of 258. Not all of them actually generated at the end of the day contracts in 2016, but this is the sort of the value of the approved projects. And very quickly, I know statistics is very boring, but just to give you a few sort of insights in this. So out of this approved, you could see that when it comes to regions, the regional assignments covering more than one country took most of those resources. In the Semite region, which we are coming down to here, it was about 10% of that. When it comes to sector, you can see that if you look on the municipal and environmental infrastructure, takes a lot of that. Which goes very much in line with what I said in terms of the number of contracts. That's a lot of focus on what we are doing. And if you look at types of work of these assignments, capacity building again, 31%, a lot of that, but also project implementation, because we do focus a lot on trying to also make sure that they are not just signing the contract, but making sure that the outcome of this is really a sustainable project. And in order to do so, we need your help. And this, just to give you a snapshot, I don't expect you to read all of this, but these are examples in the municipal environmental infrastructure of the type of studies, or let's say consultancy engagement that we have, and on the other side you can see in which type of sectors. But I think you know this already. So these are what we call transactional type of assignments. Now we have let's say the new thing in the bank is the green economic transition program, and basically what it is to put more focus on green. Everything which provides an environmental, sustainable outcome of the projects comes within the GET initiative, as it's called within the bank, Green Economic Transition. Now, why is this new? Well, it's new in the sense that previously that was not seen, and this is a culture change. It wasn't really seen as part of the transition. But now it can be counted into the transition element of what we do. So when you have a transition program, and that means that we could also increase the types of engagement that we have within environmental sector, and can do more really. And from the beginning it was thought that, well, you know, if we in 3-4 years are able to give, let's say, have 40% of our investment in this portfolio, it will be fantastic. that was actually achieved within 2 years. So already we have 40% in that. So these are the typical type of assignments within that initiative. And again, the type of projects: renewable energy, technology transfer, recycling, etc., etc., etc. And non-transactional, these are typical examples of that: policy dialogue, which include procurement, capital market development, legal advice, evaluation of projects, IT design, etc., etc. And these are the on the right-hand side are the parts of the bank which engages this kind of service. Yeah? Now, we come to the interesting part, and that is Israeli participation. Yeah? Now, I would say that this is very good figures, because this is an area of opportunity. It gives you a great opportunity to improve these figures. So, from about 2012, 2013, the number of tenders submitted by Israeli firms, 8. Number of contracts won by Israeli entities, 2 works contracts, and I could have taken the same list as Enzo was showing which companies. It's exactly the same companies. Yeah. And 1 consultancy. Total value, 61.2 million, which actually I think was beating or same as you. Yeah, yeah. So, and then grant or bank-funded consultancy. These are the ones, because we have a substantial pot of donor financing, which we are using to finance consultancy. So that's really what this is showing, the grant or bank-funded consultancy service. And by the way, Israel has their own grant fund attached to the bank to support projects. Number of contracts won, 11 at a value of 1.3 million. I think this is fantastic. You have so much to do. Next time I'm coming here, it will be up. Exactly, yeah. This is brilliant. And I'm going to finish this with saying, I gave you one good advice before, and that was to look at the contract pipeline. That one is really, really useful. The other one, my dear friends, is that you can only win if you participate. That's really how it works, you know. So please, join in, participate. You know. And I believe, and excuse me if I'm not pronouncing this right, but Toda Rabba is thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.